Thank you. Senator Sinema, recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for being here today. Before I begin, I want to take a moment to correct the record on a few statements that have been made related to the bipartisan border security proposal I introduced earlier this year along with my colleagues, Senator Langford and Senator Murphy. First, there was misinformation related to the 5,000 daily entries. It was actually 4,000 encounters that triggered a closure of the border. And once we hit that number, including individuals who enter through our ports of entry, the border would be closed until encounters dropped to 80% of that threshold level. So this number was actually based on capacity. This was worked out closely with Secretary Mayorkas and his team, allowing us to meet our international obligations while making sure that we maintained detention capacity so that dangerous individuals would not be released into the country. Secondly, we ensured that 1,400 individuals were able to apply for asylum through an orderly process at ports of entry. These individuals would not be able to curtail or delay regular trade or travel. And for those who were granted access through our ports, they would no longer have been paroled into the United States for 2 years without a work permit. Instead, they would have been placed into a rigorous and rapid process with an initial screening within 90 days, determination of an entire claim of asylum within 6 months, and these individuals would not have received a work authorization until such time the legitimacy of their asylum claim had been determined. That, of course, are the facts of the legislation, which is contrary to some of the misinformation we heard here today. So, Mr. Chairman, fiscal year 2023 again set a new record for nationwide encounters. This year has brought no relief, with the Tucson sector in my state alone encountering over 340,000 individuals. This is the busiest sector along our southern border by over 140,000 encounters. As you know, Arizona's Lukeville Port of Entry was closed for an entire month, so port officers could help Border Patrol agents in Ajo manage the surge of migrants crossing the desert. That, as you heard from me, devastated the small businesses in that community that depend on international travel. So right now, a normal day in Arizona means migrants are released directly into border communities. They do not have the transportation or NGO infrastructure to manage these releases. There's a coordinated effort between cities, counties, and NGOs to move migrants to Tucson and Phoenix, where they're securing transportation out of the state. We tried to fix that problem. With your help and your technical assistance, Senator Langford, Senator Murphy, and I crafted a bipartisan proposal that actually addressed and reduced the encounter numbers we've seen steadily increasing over the last decade. And while partisans here in D.C. have decided that having a problem to talk about is more important than problem solving, this doesn't mean that we can just stop working to provide relief in Arizona. In Arizona, we still must continue to find ways to make meaningful policy changes to secure our border, keep Arizona families safe, and ensure that migrants are treated safely and humanely. As you know, Secretary, I helped secure $650 million in fiscal year 2024 for the CBP Shelter Services Program to limit the burden on financial burden on local communities. I was pleased to see the notice of funding opportunity published last week that gave Arizona its fair share of the money available. As you know, this money has come quite late. We were just days away from Pima County ceasing all activities to process and manage migrants. So what steps is DHS going to take to ensure that additional funds are distributed and that we don't find ourselves in this critical situation in Pima County once again?
Senator, let me first state that I was honored to work with you and the other senators on the bipartisan legislation that would have been transformative, not only in its provision of resources, but in the change of authorities with which we would be equipped, the most significant change since 1996, long overdue. We announced with the first distribution last week, we also announced a competitive process for the second tranche of funds under the Shelter and Services Program. We are going to receive applications for it from existing recipients as well as those that who are first-time applicants, and we are very focused on getting the dollars out the door as quickly as possible, as fairly as possible.
Thank you. During your last hearing in this committee, we spoke about the importance of the margin of error for INA numbers. And so first, I wanted to say thank you for following through on that commitment. FEMA recently announced it would allow up to a 5% margin of error in A numbers, which is critical for NGOs who are providing services. I was also pleased to see that the most recent fiscal year award removed the cap on motel and hotel booking, which we had discussed frequently. In order to make sure that NGOs in Arizona are effective with these grant dollars, FEMA will need to make sure that communication with our communities is clear and concise. So how does FEMA plan to ensure that information is consistent and accommodating given the inherent uncertainties of responding to the continuing crisis at Arizona's border?
Senator, the model that we have developed is to have an identified point of contact for each jurisdiction to ensure that the jurisdiction is receiving in timely fashion the information it needs. If there is any concern with respect to the consistency, accuracy, or timeliness of information, that is something that I would like to know about because we owe it to the local communities to receive the data so that they can manage operationally their responsibilities.
Following the end of Title 42, the administration introduced a series of policies that were designed to incentivize migrants to arrive at ports of entry and to deter arrivals between ports of entry. Of course, we haven't seen the arrivals contract between ports of entry. Unfortunately, it's been the opposite, where we've seen increasing, growing numbers of migrants arriving between ports of entry. So why do you think that the measures implemented to date have not been effective? And what powers do you need to reassert control of the southwest border, particularly between the ports of entry?
Senator, we have seen at times significant drops in the numbers. We work very closely with our partner to the south, with Mexico. The enforcement effort must not be exclusively at our border. It must occur prior to reaching our border. The best solution that I have seen in my many years in the Department of Homeland Security is the bipartisan legislation that you negotiated with Senators Murphy and Langford. That is a solution that we continue to believe Congress needs to pass. It is transformative in the many, many different ways that we have touched upon just briefly this morning.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Senator Sinema, thank you for the tremendous work that you did on the bipartisan package. You are a true problem solver about rolling up your sleeves. And as I said at the beginning of the hearing, unfortunately, folks who are more willing to throw rocks